My family funded my wife's secret affair with my brother. So I bought their debt, foreclosed on their house, and let them beg in the rain. My parents actively financed my wife's secret hotel rendezvous with my older brother, then helped him get me fired so I couldn't afford a divorce lawyer to fight back. Today, they stood shivering in the freezing Seattle rain, desperately begging my security guards for 5 minutes with the billionaire CEO who just foreclosed on their entire lives, having absolutely no idea the man they were pleading with was me. Before I tell you exactly how I systematically dismantled their lives and took everything from them, hit that like button if you believe karma always collects its debts, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Now, let's go back to where this absolute nightmare started. I am standing right now on the 50th floor of my company's headquarters in downtown Seattle. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer a spectacular, panoramic view of the Puget Sound and the sprawling city skyline. It is a view that costs more per month in commercial leasing than my parents made in an entire decade. The glass is incredibly thick, completely soundproof, keeping the chaotic noise of the city completely at bay, but my eyes are not focused on the beautiful horizon or the ferries crossing the dark water. They are locked dead on the street level below. The rain is coming down in aggressive, unforgiving sheets today. It is the kind of miserable, bone-chilling Pacific Northwest downpour that soaks right through your clothes, ruins your leather shoes, and sinks deep into your soul. Down there on the concrete pavement, shivering under a useless, wind-battered black umbrella, is my older brother, Liam. Next to him is Maya, the woman I once stood before God and promised my life to, clutching a cheap transparent raincoat tightly around her shoulders, her dark hair plastered to the sides of her face. And huddled slightly behind them, looking infinitely smaller, older, and more fragile than I have ever seen them in my entire life, are my parents, Richard and Helen. They look utterly pathetic. They look exactly like the kind of people who have run out of options, run out of money, and finally run out of lies to tell themselves. They are aggressively demanding to see the owner of the massive conglomerate that just effectively ended their luxurious, fake lives. Just 5 minutes ago, the head security guard at the marble front desk in the lobby called up to my private office. His voice was hesitant, highly professional, but clearly uncomfortable, asking if I wanted to receive the frantic, soaking wet family causing a massive scene near the elevators. They were shouting about illegal lawsuits, about unfair business practices, aggressively demanding to speak to the boss. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, looked at the blinking light on my desk phone, and told the guard to lock the revolving glass doors and let them wait out there in the freezing rain. Looking down at them from this incredible height, you would think I would feel a massive rush of pure, unadulterated joy. You would think I would be laughing out loud, popping open a bottle of vintage champagne, and celebrating my ultimate victory over the people who maliciously threw me to the wolves. But the absolute truth is, I just feel a deep, cold emptiness inside my chest, followed quickly by a profound, heavy sense of relief. It took me 3 brutal years of absolute hell to build this flavor science and beverage extraction empire. 3 years of blood, sweat, tears, sleepless nights, and an absolutely ruthless legal strategy to get to this exact moment in time. I did not get lucky. I orchestrated this outcome. I meticulously planned every single lawsuit, every hostile corporate acquisition, and every strategic market maneuver to ensure that when the hammer finally fell, it would completely crush the very foundation of their arrogance and their bank accounts. People ask me all the time how I became so successful so quickly in such a highly competitive industry. They see the tailored charcoal suits, the luxury cars parked in my private underground garage, and the rapidly expanding business portfolio, and they naturally assume I had some massive inheritance waiting for me. They assume I had a wealthy, connected mentor who simply handed me the keys to the kingdom. They do not know that my relentless drive was forged in the absolute ultimate betrayal. They do not know that my ambition is fueled by the sickening memory of my own mother handing my wife the keys to a luxury hotel room so she could sleep with my own brother. When you lose everything in the blink of an eye, your marriage, your family, your dignity, your savings, and your entire sense of reality, you only have 2 choices in this world. You can let the suffocating grief swallow you whole, let the dark depression become your permanent address, and live the rest of your life as a bitter, broken victim. Or you can take all that burning rage, all that toxic waste they carelessly dumped on you, and use it as high-octane rocket fuel. I chose the latter. I chose to weaponize my heartbreak. I chose to build a fortress so high they could never touch me again. Standing here watching the harsh rain batter their shoulders, my mind inevitably drifts back to the very beginning of my life. I realize now, with the crystal clear, painful vision of hindsight, that the warning signs were always there, flashing right in front of my face. The blatant favoritism, the subtle cutting digs at the dinner table, the way I was always treated like a second-class citizen in the very home I grew up in. I was born into a family that viewed me not as a beloved son, but as a backup plan, a safety net they could happily trample on whenever it suited their needs. I just stubbornly refused to see it until they forced me to look at the ugly, undeniable truth. I grew up in a very average, seemingly perfect middle-class family in the sprawling suburbs of Seattle. From the outside looking in, we looked like the quintessential American dream. We lived in a 2-story craftsman house with a perfectly manicured lawn situated at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. My father, Richard, was the president of the local HOA, always shaking hands, organizing neighborhood watch programs, and playing the role of the highly responsible, upstanding civic leader. My mother, Helen, baked intricate pastries for the community bake sales, and hosted massive summer barbecues. We smiled widely for the annual holiday cards, projecting an impenetrable image of total domestic bliss to our neighbors. But behind those freshly painted front doors, my family made it painfully obvious who the star of the show really was, and it was never me. Liam, my older brother by 3 years, was the undeniable, untouchable golden child. He was incredibly charismatic, naturally athletic, and possessed this arrogant, easy confidence that my parents absolutely adored. When Liam expressed a passing interest in joining an elite, highly competitive traveling soccer league, my parents signed him up without a single second thought. They bought all the top-tier expensive gear, drove across state lines every single weekend, stayed in expensive hotels, and cheered wildly at every single game. When I, at age 12, asked to join a basic community science program because I was deeply fascinated by chemistry and flavor profiles, my mother sighed heavily, as if my simple request was an enormous, unbearable burden on the family. She looked at me, rubbed her temples, and told me that they were stretched far too thin right now, and maybe we could look into it next year. Next year came and went, and absolutely nothing happened. My childhood dreams and interests were simply collateral damage in the grand, expensive project of funding Liam's perfect life. The blatant, unapologetic favoritism hit a sickening, unforgettable peak during our teenage years. I will never forget my 18th birthday as long as I live. For Liam's 18th birthday, my parents had secretly dipped heavily into their retirement savings and bought him a car. It was not just any practical used car, it was a used BMW. They threw a massive catered party, invited the whole neighborhood, rented a huge white tent for the backyard, and paraded him around like royalty. My father gave a long, tearful speech about how Liam was destined for absolute greatness. When I finally turned 18 3 years later, I did not even bother asking for a car. I already knew my place in the hierarchy. What I received was a cheap, dry sheet cake from a grocery store, heavily discounted because the icing was smeared, and a generic greeting card that said they were proud of me. But the memory that truly cemented my complete lack of worth in their eyes was a Christmas morning a few years later. My parents always went completely overboard for Liam during the holidays. That year, Liam tore open a custom leather briefcase and an incredibly expensive vintage watch. I sat there on the living room floor in my worn-out jeans and opened a small, flat cardboard box. Inside was a multi-pack of plain white socks and a $50 Amazon gift card. My mother looked at me with a perfectly straight face, her eyes practically daring me to complain, and said, "We spent the exact same amount on you both this year, Julian. Don't look so disappointed." I didn't let their emotional neglect destroy my future. I worked my absolute hardest in high school because I genuinely felt like I had to prove my worth to the world just to justify my existence. I worked 2 grueling part-time jobs during college, one flipping burgers and smelling constantly like stale cooking grease, and another stocking heavy boxes on warehouse shelves overnight just to afford my tuition. My parents claimed they couldn't help me financially, citing the tough economy. Yet, they were somehow magically managing to pay for Liam's entire MBA program and his luxurious downtown apartment. I majored in chemical engineering with a deep focus on flavor science. It was my absolute passion. While Liam was out aggressively networking, playing golf, and partying on our parents' dime, I was in the university lab learning how to isolate chemical compounds, deeply understanding how flavor and scent powerfully tie to human memory and raw emotion. I wanted to create high-end, revolutionary extraction methods for the specialty coffee industry. During my senior year, I was working at a small boutique coffee roastery in the city. It was not glamorous, but I was surrounded by the raw materials I loved, barely making minimum wage. That is exactly where I met Maya. Maya walked into the shop one rainy Tuesday afternoon. She was stunning, elegant, soft-spoken, with a warm smile that completely disarmed my usually guarded nature. I spent a full hour showing her different complex roast profiles, explaining the intricate chemistry behind the bright acidity of Ethiopian beans and the deep, lingering chocolate notes of Sumatran blends. She didn't just listen politely, she leaned in. She looked at me right in the eyes like I was the most fascinating person in the world. No one had ever taken that kind of genuine, undivided interest in me before. We started dating almost immediately. She didn't care that I was a broke college student grinding through a minimum wage job. She admired my intense ambition. For the first time in my entire life, I felt like I was somebody's absolute priority. I proposed to her 2 years later. I meticulously saved up every single spare dime from my meager junior flavor scientist salary, skipping meals to afford a beautiful, modest diamond ring. When I eagerly drove to my parents' house to tell them we were officially engaged, my mother barely looked up from her glossy magazine. She took a slow sip of her wine and said, "Well, I hope her family has money, Julian, because you certainly do not." Our wedding day should have been the happiest day of my life, but Liam made absolutely sure to cast his toxic, suffocating shadow over every single moment of it. Liam showed up late in a custom-tailored tuxedo that cost more than my entire wedding budget. He spent the entire reception heavily drinking premium liquor, dominating every conversation, and aggressively networking. But what really made my blood boil was a moment toward the end of the night. I was walking back from the restroom when I saw Liam corner Maya near the open bar. He was leaning in way too close, invading her personal space. I heard him say, his voice dripping with arrogance, "Wow, Julian really hit the jackpot, didn't he? I didn't think my little brother had it in him to land a woman like you. You could do so much better, you know." I fully expected Maya to slap his face. I expected her to walk away in total disgust. Instead, I stood frozen and watched Maya laugh. It was not a polite, uncomfortable chuckle. It was a genuine, flushed, throaty laugh. She reached out and touched his arm lightly before turning away. At the time, I forcefully brushed it off. I trusted my wife implicitly. I had absolutely no idea that the foundation of my life was already rotting from the inside out. Update 1. The first year of our marriage was good. I proudly landed a junior scientist position at a mid-sized reputable beverage company in the city. The starting salary wasn't making us rich, but it paid the mortgage on our small townhouse. I was working long, grueling hours in the laboratory, volunteering for extra projects, trying desperately to secure a major promotion so we could start a family. But right around our second wedding anniversary, things started to significantly shift. A dark, suffocating tension slowly crept into our home. It started with Liam. He began showing up completely unannounced at our place. I mean, letting himself in with a spare key mid-afternoon on regular weekdays, always dressed to the nines in his expensive designer gear. Because I was working late at the lab almost every night, I wasn't there for most of these random visits. I would come home utterly exhausted to find Liam sitting comfortably on my couch, drinking my expensive scotch, with Maya sitting entirely too close to him on the cushions. When I asked her later what he was doing there, Maya would just smile dismissively, actively avoiding eye contact, and say, "Oh, he was just in the neighborhood. Don't be so paranoid and jealous, Julian." Then Maya herself began to drastically change. She began complaining constantly and bitterly about our modest house, our aging used car, and my totally average income. Suddenly, out of nowhere, she was wearing brand new designer dresses and carrying authentic luxury handbags that easily cost more than my entire monthly mortgage payment. When I confronted her, she vaguely claimed she got an unexpected cash bonus at her administrative job. The ultimate turning point, the exact moment my entire reality permanently fractured into a million jagged pieces, happened on a rainy Thursday in late October. I had come home early because a sudden power outage at the main laboratory canceled our afternoon trials. I walked into the house, and it was dead silent. I went upstairs to our bedroom to change. As I reached into the closet, I accidentally knocked over Liam's incredibly expensive wool coat, which he had inexplicably left draped over a chair in our bedroom the night before. When the heavy coat hit the hardwood floor, a folded piece of thick glossy paper slipped out of the inside breast pocket. I picked it up, and my eyes automatically caught the embossed gold logo at the top. It was an itemized receipt for the Times Cascade Luxury Lodge, one of the most exclusive, ridiculously expensive boutique hotels in the entire region. The dates printed on the receipt were for the previous weekend, a specific weekend Maya explicitly told me she was going on a girls' wellness retreat with her younger sister, Sophie. The luxury suite was booked under Liam's name. The total was over $4,000. But what truly stopped my breath, what made the blood literally turn to freezing ice in my veins, was the payment method printed clearly at the bottom. The last 4 digits of the credit card printed on the receipt did not belong to Liam. I recognized those 4 specific digits instantly because I had personally set up the online banking portal for my parents years ago. It was my mother's premium high-limit credit card. I stood there frozen in my bedroom, the piece of paper trembling so violently in my hands that I could barely read the numbers anymore. Liam wasn't just sleeping with my wife. My parents were literally paying for the hotel room. I grabbed my car keys, ran out of the house into the pouring rain, and drove straight to Maya's sister's apartment. I hammered my fists on Sophie's door until she finally answered. When she saw the look of absolute murder on my face, all the color instantly drained from hers. She knew. I didn't yell. I just held up the crumpled hotel receipt, my voice terrifyingly calm, and said, "Tell me the absolute truth right now, Sophie, or I swear to God, I will subpoena your phone records during the divorce discovery process." Sophie immediately broke down, crying hysterically. She confessed absolutely everything. She told me Maya and Liam had been secretly sleeping together for over 8 months. They would constantly use her as a fake alibi. But then Sophie dropped the absolute crushing blow that destroyed me. She admitted, sobbing, that she had felt so incredibly guilty about the affair that she had secretly gone to my mother, Helen, 3 months ago, practically begging her to intervene and stop Liam from destroying my marriage. Do you know what my loving mother told Sophie? My mother told her to keep her mouth shut and mind her own business. My mother stated clearly that Liam was a highly successful man who could give Maya the luxurious life she truly deserved, and that I was just a poor scientist holding Maya back. I later discovered through a ruthless private investigator that my parents had quietly sold a valuable piece of rural family real estate they owned specifically to pad my mother's bank account so she could seamlessly fund Liam's extravagant lifestyle and his secret hotel hookups with my wife without raising flags. They literally sold family property to finance my utter destruction. I didn't sleep a single second that entire night. I sat in the pitch dark in my freezing car, staring blankly at the dashboard clock. I needed a bulletproof plan. I knew with absolute certainty that if I confronted them immediately in a blind emotional rage, they would instantly gaslight me. I needed to secure my personal finances first. I needed to keep my stable job, secure that impending promotion to director, and use the increased salary to hire the absolute best, most vicious divorce attorney in the city. The next morning, I drove to the beverage company headquarters, running on nothing but pure adrenaline and shattering heartbreak. I planned to go straight to HR to request an emergency advance on my salary. But my highly manipulative brother had vastly different plans for me. As soon as I walked through the heavy glass doors of the lobby, 2 large corporate security guards and a senior representative from HR intercepted me. They escorted me directly into the corner office of my boss, David. David wouldn't even make eye contact with me. He stared firmly down at his massive mahogany desk, sliding a thick manila folder across the polished wood. "Julian, we are letting you go," David muttered, his voice tight and rehearsed. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you to your desk to pack your personal belongings, and then you are to leave the premises." I stared at him, my mind completely short-circuiting. My performance reviews had been absolutely flawless for 2 years. David shifted extremely uncomfortably. "There have been several complaints about your general attitude and your recent mental stability. We are aggressively restructuring." It was a blatant, disgusting lie. It made absolutely zero sense until a few days later when a sympathetic coworker called me off the record. She let it slip that Liam had recently taken David out for an incredibly expensive steak dinner. Liam's massive logistics and packaging company was a major supplier to our lab. Liam had aggressively leveraged his massive corporate weight, explicitly threatening to pull a multi-million-dollar supply contract unless David fired me on the spot. Liam had boldly claimed I was mentally unstable and causing toxic drama. David, the pathetic coward that he was, gladly took the bribe and threw me straight under the bus. Liam hadn't just stolen my wife. He had systematically, maliciously orchestrated the total destruction of my career so I wouldn't have the financial resources to fight back against him in court. I was publicly escorted out of the building by security. I drove back to the townhouse, my chest incredibly tight with a cold, terrifying clarity. I walked through the front door, and there was Maya, standing right in the middle of the living room. She was zipping up a massive, expensive designer suitcase. She looked up at me, her face completely hardened, entirely void of any of the warmth or love I once foolishly believed she had for me. She looked at me like I was a disgusting stranger. "I am leaving you, Julian," she said, her voice dripping with absolute unapologetic disdain. "I am filing for divorce today. I want you out of this house by the end of the week." She didn't even try to hide the betrayal anymore. She knew I had been fired. She and Liam had planned this exact vicious sequence of events perfectly to leave me completely paralyzed, broke, and defenseless. She walked right past me, dragging her expensive luggage I now knew my own mother had paid for, and walked out the front door. Through the window, I watched her get into Liam's black Porsche idling by the curb. They just drove away. I stood there completely alone in the empty living room of a house I could no longer afford, with absolutely no job, no wife, no family, and almost nothing left in my bank account. The silence of the house was absolute, heavy, and deafening. But as I stood there in the absolute wreckage, something deep inside my soul permanently shifted. The weak, desperate Julian who constantly wanted his parents' approval died right there. I walked over to my cardboard box from work and pulled out my personal leather-bound chemistry notebook. It contained all my proprietary, unreleased, highly advanced formulas for revolutionary coffee extraction. I made a silent, unbreakable vow to myself. They thought they had buried me deep in the dirt, but they forgot one absolutely crucial thing: I was a master scientist. I knew exactly how to mix highly volatile elements to create an explosive, unstoppable reaction. I didn't need a family anymore. I needed an empire. And I was going to build it directly on top of their absolute total ruin. Update 2. The divorce process was an absolute, unmitigated bloodbath. Because I had absolutely no inheritance and no salary whatsoever thanks to Liam's malicious corporate sabotage, I was completely at their financial mercy. Maya hired the most ruthless, notoriously expensive divorce lawyer in the city. Her retainer was paid for entirely by my mother's premium credit card. I walked into that cold courtroom representing myself. Maya's lawyer systematically, ruthlessly stripped away absolutely everything I had ever worked for. They took the townhouse, citing my sudden lack of a stable salary. They took the meager, hard-earned savings we had meticulously built in our joint account. I walked out of that depressing courthouse on a freezing Tuesday morning with absolutely nothing to my name but my beat-up aging sedan and my leather-bound notebook. I was forced to move into a tiny, windowless studio apartment in the absolute worst, most dangerous part of town. The ancient radiator barely worked, and the sickening smell of stale cigarette smoke was baked permanently into the peeling wallpaper. I survived strictly on cheap ramen noodles and sheer unadulterated hatred. I swallowed my pride and took a grueling, back-breaking night shift job at a massive, incredibly dangerous industrial food processing plant. I spent my nights physically mixing heavy drums of industrial solvents from midnight to 8:00 inches the morning just to pay my exorbitant rent. But the absolute second I clocked out and dragged myself back to that terrible apartment, the real meaningful work began. I transformed my tiny, cramped kitchen counter into a sophisticated makeshift laboratory. I spent absolutely every single spare dime I earned on raw, high-grade specialty coffee beans and professional glass beakers. I worked until my eyes physically blurred and my calloused hands shook violently from pure exhaustion. I wasn't just brewing coffee, I was literally distilling my rage, my heartbreak, and my trauma into a tangible physical product. I engineered a cold extraction process that was vastly more complex, incredibly sophisticated, and undeniably superior to anything on the market. It yielded a concentrate so smooth and perfectly balanced it tasted like pure luxury. After 8 brutal months of relentless failure and hundreds of ruined batches, I finally cracked the perfect chemical code. I bottled the dark liquid in cheap glass vials, printed homemade minimalist labels at a local copy shop, and called the brand Times Apex Extracts. I started aggressively peddling my product to independent boutique owners and exclusive high-end cafes across the city. I was flatly rejected 99 times. People looked at my homemade packaging and literally laughed in my face. But on the 100th try, a highly respected cafe owner in the wealthy financial district agreed to put 5 small bottles on his front counter just to get me to leave. Those 5 bottles completely sold out in 4 hours. The very next day, he frantically called me and ordered 20 more. The week after that, he demanded 100. Word of mouth spread like absolute wildfire among the city's wealthy elite. The massive, life-altering turning point came when a highly prominent, wildly successful venture capitalist named Nolan walked into that specific cafe. Nolan bought a bottle of Times Apex, immediately recognized the unprecedented quality, tracked down my personal phone number, and aggressively demanded a business meeting. I walked into his massive glass-walled corner office wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit from a thrift store. I sat down, looked him dead in the eye, and gave him the raw, undeniable chemistry and the incredibly high profit margins of the product. Nolan was blown away. He immediately introduced me to Mr. Vance, a quiet, incredibly ruthless billionaire investor who controlled a massive private equity firm. Mr. Vance meticulously looked at my proprietary formulas, looked at the desperate burning fire in my eyes, and wrote me a massive seed funding check that fundamentally changed the entire trajectory of my life forever. He didn't just give me working capital, he gave me an entire fully operational manufacturing plant and a global distribution network. Over the next 3 grueling but triumphant years, Apex Extracts completely exploded. We launched a massive full line of premium ready-to-drink beverages and commercial concentrates. We got picked up by massive national retailers. We became the absolute fastest-growing specialty beverage brand in the entire country. I was making millions of dollars, investing heavily in prime commercial real estate, and building an impenetrable corporate fortress, all while Liam, Maya, and my parents smugly thought I was rotting away in a gutter somewhere. I intentionally used a pseudonym for the press and stayed completely off all social media. I wanted my massive new wealth to be entirely invisible. And while I was steadily, relentlessly climbing to the absolute peak of the mountain, Liam was actively, arrogantly digging his own financial grave. Liam had inherited his highly lucrative regional logistics company from his wealthy former father-in-law, from his first brief marriage, before he stole my wife. But Liam was absolutely not a competent businessman. He was a spoiled, deeply arrogant golden child who firmly believed massive success was his divine birthright. He spent his days playing expensive rounds of golf, taking 3-hour alcohol-fueled martini lunches, and aggressively micromanaging his best employees right into the ground. He actively alienated his biggest corporate clients with his insufferable ego. Within 2 short years of stealing Maya, Liam's logistics company was heavily, dangerously bleeding cash to maintain their absurdly lavish fake lifestyle, the brand new Porsche, the designer clothes, the ridiculously expensive international vacations they constantly posted online. Liam started secretly taking out massive, high-interest corporate loans from predatory lenders. He recklessly leveraged the entire infrastructure of the company. My parents, utterly, hopelessly blinded by their lifelong delusional worship of him, actually co-signed a massive secondary loan to bail him out. They voluntarily put the deed to their beloved pristine Craftsman house up as collateral. They actually genuinely believed he was just going through a temporary rough patch. I watched it all happen in real time through the meticulous, highly detailed financial reports of my expensive private investigators and my elite corporate lawyers. I knew exactly how much crippling debt they were in. I knew exactly which specific banking institutions held their toxic loans. And because I now had substantially more liquid capital than I ever knew what to do with, I legally created a complex series of anonymous corporate shell companies. Slowly, methodically, and completely legally, my shell companies began quietly buying up their massive debt portfolios. I bought the commercial loans holding Liam's failing logistics company hostage. I bought the secondary mortgage on my parents' suburban house. I became their sole anonymous, completely merciless creditor. They thought they owed money to massive, faceless banking institutions. They had absolutely no idea they owed every single red cent to the younger son they had casually thrown away like garbage. The trap was fully, perfectly set. The steel jaws were wide open. All I had to do was sit back and wait for them to run out of cash. And inevitably, they absolutely did. Liam missed one massive loan payment, then two, then three, then. The banks, acting entirely on my strict, merciless, legally binding orders, flatly refused any extensions or restructuring. We aggressively called in the entirety of the massive loans. We initiated the aggressive rapid foreclosure process on the family real estate. We completely froze the corporate assets and the payroll accounts. We completely pulled the rug out from under their fake plastic lives in a matter of 48 hours. Absolute total panic set in. My lawyers informed me that Liam had been frantically calling the holding company's main line for 3 days straight, aggressively demanding to speak to the CEO, screaming wildly about unfair business practices. Finally, after letting him sweat in absolute terror, I told my executive secretary to grant him a formal meeting. I specifically scheduled it for a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I wanted them to physically feel the bitter cold. I wanted them to step right into the trap of their own blind arrogance. And they walked right into it, completely blissfully oblivious to the absolute slaughter that was waiting for them on the 50th floor. The incredibly heavy solid mahogany doors to my massive executive boardroom are completely soundproofed. I was sitting quietly at the head of the massive 20-foot polished granite conference table. The room was intentionally dimly lit, the massive floor-to-ceiling windows right behind me casting my dark silhouette sharply against the gray, stormy sky. My lead corporate attorney stood quietly by the window, securely holding a thick black leather binder containing every single devastating financial document and asset seizure order we had meticulously prepared. The intercom buzzed. "Send them in," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. The double doors swung open, pushed forcefully by Liam. He marched into the room first, his supposedly expensive suit deeply wrinkled and damp from the pouring rain outside, his face flushed an angry red with absolute arrogant indignation. Maya followed right behind him, nervously clutching a wet designer handbag, looking around the incredibly opulent boardroom with wide, fearful eyes. And then came my parents, shuffling in slowly, looking exhausted and totally terrified. They didn't look at me at first because the bright light was directly behind me. I was just a dark imposing figure. Listen to me very carefully. Liam started shouting immediately, marching up to the table and slamming his hand down hard on the polished granite edge. "I don't care who you think you are or what kind of illegal predatory lending operation you are running. You cannot just illegally seize my corporate assets without a standard grace period. I am a highly respected businessman. I will aggressively drag your entire holding company into a massive, highly public lawsuit. My parents' real estate is totally, completely off limits." I let him finish his pathetic rant. I let the echo of his empty, desperate threats completely die out in the massive, silent room. The heavy silence stretched out for 10 agonizing, suffocating seconds. Then, I slowly leaned forward into the overhead light. I deliberately rested my elbows on the cold granite table, intertwined my fingers, and looked directly, piercingly into my older brother's eyes. "You do not have the money for a massive lawsuit, Liam," I said calmly, my voice incredibly steady, low, and cold as ice. "You do not even have the money to pay for the parking meter downstairs on the street." Liam completely, totally froze. His jaw physically dropped open. All the angry red color instantly violently drained from his face, leaving him looking like a pale, terrified ghost. He stumbled backward half a step, completely losing his balance, physically bumping into Maya. Maya let out a sharp, highly audible gasp, her trembling hand flying up to cover her mouth. She recognized me instantly. My mother, Helen, let out a strange, horrible choking sound, desperately grabbing my father's arm for physical support. My father just stared at me, his brain entirely unable to process the reality sitting in front of him. "Julian?" My mother whispered, her voice trembling so violently it physically cracked. "What? What are you doing sitting there? Where is the owner of the company?" I smiled at her. It was absolutely not a happy smile. It was the terrifying cold smile of an apex predator. I am the owner, mother, I said, leaning back comfortably in my expensive leather chair, savoring the absolute shock on their faces. I am the sole owner of the holding company. I own the private equity firm that bought out your bank. Which legally means, as of 48 hours ago, I own Liam's logistics company. I own Liam's fancy Porsche. And I hold the absolute legal deed to your beautiful pristine Craftsman house. This is a joke, Liam stammered uncontrollably, shaking his head frantically in total denial. This is a massive, sick, elaborate joke. You are a broke, pathetic flavor scientist. You got fired for being unstable. You do not have this kind of massive corporate capital. I nodded silently toward my lawyer. He stepped forward from the shadows, calmly opening the heavy leather binder, and tossed 4 incredibly thick stacks of legally binding documents directly in front of them on the granite table. The loud slap of the paper hitting the stone echoed in the room. These are the certified legally binding financial transfer records, my attorney said, his tone entirely clinical. My client legally acquired your outstanding corporate debt 3 months ago. He also legally acquired the secondary mortgage. You are in total catastrophic default. The foreclosure and the corporate asset seizure are entirely legal, binding, and actively being enforced by local authorities as we speak. Liam looked down at the massive stacks of papers, his hands visibly shaking as he frantically flipped through the pages. He saw his own signatures. He saw my new legal corporate name at the top. The absolute crushing reality of his complete destruction finally crashed down. Julian, please, Maya stepped forward, stepping right in front of Liam, her voice suddenly entirely different. Gone was the absolute disdain and cruelty she showed me the day she packed her bags. Now, she sounded incredibly sweet, highly desperate, actively trying to manufacture fake tears. You absolutely do not have to do this to us. We are family. We made mistakes. Terrible mistakes, but we can fix this. We can work out a payment plan. I looked at her, searching my own soul and feeling absolutely nothing but total indifference. You made a very clear choice, Maya. You boldly chose the man with the Porsche. But you foolishly forgot that a car is just metal, and metal eventually rusts. You backed the wrong horse, and now you have to walk. My mother violently pushed past Maya, real terrified tears streaming rapidly down her wrinkled face. Julian, sweetheart, my beautiful baby boy, please, you absolutely cannot take our family home. We have lived there for 30 years. All your precious childhood memories are in that house. You can severely punish Liam if you want, but do not punish your own loving parents. We love you so much. I stood up slowly, planting both of my hands firmly on the table, leaning aggressively over the granite to look my mother dead in her terrified eyes. Childhood memories? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low. You mean the precious memory of you sitting in your kitchen telling Sophie that I was a pathetic loser holding Maya back? You mean the heartwarming memory of you secretly selling your valuable rural real estate specifically to fund your favorite son's expensive hotel room so he could comfortably sleep with my wife behind my back? You actively, intentionally financed my absolute destruction, mother. You handed them the knife, paid for the blade, and happily watched them stab me. Do not you dare stand in my boardroom and try to use the word love. My father suddenly yelled, desperately trying to summon some pathetic patriarchal authority. You are being incredibly vindictive and cruel, Julian. Blood is thicker than water. You must forgive your family. You are right, Richard, I shot back instantly, calling him by his first name for the very first time in my entire life, watching him flinch at the disrespect. Blood is much thicker. It is messier, and it permanently stains everything it touches. You consciously chosen Liam over me since the day I was born. So now you get to fully live with him. You get to figure out exactly how to survive in the real world when the golden child permanently loses all his gold. Liam suddenly lunged forward with a feral scream, aggressively grabbing the heavy legal documents and violently tearing them in half, throwing the shredded pieces across the boardroom. I will fight you to the bitter end, he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. I will hire every single ruthless lawyer in this state. I will completely destroy you. With what money? I asked quietly. That simple question stopped him cold in his tracks. He froze, his hands still raised in the air. Your corporate payroll accounts are entirely frozen, I explained slowly. Your personal premium credit cards are completely maxed out and deactivated. Your house is currently being padlocked by the county sheriff's department as we speak. You are completely, utterly destitute. You are exactly where you intentionally left me 3 years ago. The only difference is I had the incredible brains and the massive drive to build an empire out of absolutely nothing. You do not even know how to make your own cup of coffee without paying someone else to do it. Make sad. I pressed the intercom button firmly. Security, we are entirely finished here. Please promptly escort these 4 individuals off the premises. If they resist, call the police, and have them formally arrested for trespassing. As the security guards walked swiftly into the room, Maya started sobbing hysterically, sinking to her knees on the expensive carpet. My mother was wailing loudly, grabbing my father's jacket. Liam just stood there, completely paralyzed, staring at me like he was looking at the actual devil himself. "Get out of my building," I said firmly, turning my back to them completely and looking out the massive window at the pouring rain. "And never ever try to contact me again." The immediate fallout from that boardroom meeting was completely absolute and shockingly fast. The entire fragile, debt-ridden structure of their fake lives completely disintegrated into dust within days. The bank officially seized Liam's logistics company the very next morning, locking the doors and liquidating the physical assets. The shiny Porsche was aggressively towed right out of his driveway by the repo men before noon while his wealthy neighbors watched. My parents were formally legally evicted from their beloved pristine house by the end of the week. The absolute humiliation of the entire neighborhood actively watching the armed sheriff enforce the foreclosure notice broke my mother completely. She became a total social pariah overnight. They were forced to move into a cramped, depressing two-bedroom apartment in a highly dangerous neighborhood. To pay the new rent, my father was forced to take a grueling minimum-wage night shift job as a security guard at a local drafty warehouse. But the absolute most poetic, mind-blowing twist of pure karma, the massive secondary explosion that completely vaporized whatever tiny shred was left of Liam's fragile sanity, happened about a month later. I was sitting quietly in my office when my private unlisted cell phone rang. It was Sophie, Maya's younger sister. Her voice was highly frantic and filled with a dark, twisted kind of amusement. "Julian," she said, "you are absolutely not going to believe what just happened. After everything they did to you, you deserve to know." Sophie quickly explained that about 8 months ago, Maya had excitedly publicly announced she was pregnant. Liam had been insufferably proud, aggressively bragging to everyone at the country club about his impending fatherhood. Maya had given birth to a baby boy exactly 2 weeks after my hostile corporate takeover officially stripped them of all their money. The extreme suffocating stress of losing the luxury lifestyle had caused a massive violent fracture in their already toxic relationship. Liam, terrified and broke, violently demanded to know how they were going to afford raising a child when they could barely afford groceries. In the middle of a massive screaming match in their tiny, newly rented apartment, Maya finally snapped under the pressure and confessed the ultimate, devastating truth. The baby wasn't Liam's. During the last year, while Liam was busy arrogantly running his company into the ground, Maya had gotten incredibly bored. She had started sleeping with her expensive, highly muscular personal trainer at the luxury gym Liam was paying thousands of dollars a month for. She had intentionally lied about the paternity, actively planning to trap Liam into funding her wealthy lifestyle forever. But now that Liam was totally broke, the new baby was nothing but a massive financial anchor, and she maliciously threw the painful truth right in his face just to hurt him. The woman he utterly destroyed his own younger brother to steal had done the exact same horrifying thing to him. Liam completely, totally lost his mind. He physically destroyed the small apartment in a blind feral rage, throwing furniture through the windows. The police were called by terrified neighbors. Maya immediately filed a massive restrictive restraining order against him. A quick DNA test proved he wasn't the biological father. He was publicly, brutally, completely humiliated. Everyone in their elite social circle found out the sordid details. Liam was left with absolutely nothing, no company, no money, no fancy cars, no wife, no child, and a totally ruined professional reputation. The last I heard, he was working as a low-level minimum wage dispatcher for a cheap trucking company, living in a rented filthy room, drinking cheap beer, and aggressively blaming everyone else in the world for his massive failures. My parents tried to desperately reach out to me a few times, sending pathetic handwritten letters begging for forgiveness and asking for cash loans. I simply handed them to my assistant and told her to put them directly into the industrial shredder. They made their choice a long time ago. Now they get to choke on the absolute reality of who their golden child really is. Walking away from the absolute wreckage of my old life, leaving them crying in that boardroom, was the most incredibly liberating feeling I have ever experienced. I established an impenetrable titanium boundary. The very next day, I legally dropped my father's last name entirely. I went to the county courthouse and officially changed my legal last name to Apex. I was no longer the unwanted, unloved son of a pathetic, toxic family. I was the absolute master of my own destiny. About a year after the boardroom confrontation, I attended a highly exclusive charity gala I was personally sponsoring. That is where I finally met Elena. Elena was an independent commercial architect, incredibly smart, sharp-witted, and wildly passionate about her career. We started talking casually, and I was instantly captivated. For our first few weeks of dating, I intentionally didn't tell her about my massive wealth. We just went to quiet local coffee shops and walked through city parks. She fell deeply in love with Julian the man, not Julian the billionaire CEO. When I finally brought her to my massive penthouse and explained my business empire, she genuinely didn't care about the money. She cared about the intense drive and the incredible resilience it took to build it. She was the complete total opposite of Maya in every conceivable way. We are officially getting married next spring. We are actively planning a very small, Incredibly private wedding in a beautiful secluded botanical garden. There will be absolutely no toxic relatives invited. By family, I exclusively mean the family we have actively, carefully chosen. We are also actively talking about starting a family of our own soon. I have already set up a massive ironclad trust fund for our future children. But vastly more importantly, I have made a sacred unbreakable vow to myself. I will never ever treat one child differently than another. I will give them the unconditional fierce love and protection that I was completely denied by my own parents. Looking back at the absolute nightmare I survived, I realized something incredibly profound. I used to desperately wish that none of it had ever happened. But sitting here today, looking out at the massive city I completely conquered, holding Elena's hand, I wouldn't change a single agonizing second of it. The absolute unforgiving cruelty of my parents and the sickening betrayal of my brother and my wife did not destroy me like they planned, it forged me. It violently burned away every single ounce of weakness inside my soul, leaving behind nothing but unbreakable, hardened steel. They arrogantly tried to bury me deep in the dirt so Liam could shine brighter. But they didn't realize I was a seed. And from that dark dirt, I grew into a massive towering tree that now completely blocks out their sun. Top comments. User 1. The fact that your mom literally sold family real estate to fund your wife's hotel hookups with your brother is the most diabolical, evil thing I've ever read on this app. Buying their debt and foreclosing on them was the ultimate chef's kiss of karma. You didn't just burn the bridge, you nuked the entire city. User 2. Liam finding out the baby was the personal trainer's right after losing his entire company is proof that the universe has a sense of humor. Maya really thought she secured the bag, only to find out the bag was empty and on fire. Glad you found Elena and built a real life, OP. User 3. I actually gasped out loud when you told Liam he couldn't even afford the parking meter downstairs. The level of meticulous planning it took to buy up their debt through shell companies is insane. You literally became a supervillain to the people who created you, and I am 100% here for it.